like to ask you to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and to remain standing for a moment of silence and to remember all those who have been harmed over the last couple of days and all those serving across the world. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We got a full board. Yes. Good evening, everyone. I want to thank you all for attending the Village of Woodbury Planning Board of November 1st, 2017. To my right, we have Robert Anzalone. To my left, we have Sandra Capriglione. Then we have Chris Gibelli, Rich Cottagio. We have our Secretary, Gail Noggle. All the way to the far left, we have Dennis Lindsay, our engineer. We have Jonathan, our planner, and Rick Golden, our attorney. Anyone else here for my traffic consultants not here? Okay. No problem. We'll deal with that later. And I'm Maria Hunter. I'm your chairperson. Everyone have a moment to read the minutes of October 4th, and if so, do I have a motion to accept?
I'll make the motion.
Do I have a second? Was that you, Chris, or Rich?
Rich.
I can't hear you over there. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Just give me Rick and Josh. Anyone here for Timber Trail? Okay, take the microphone.
Madam Chairwoman, I'm recusing myself.
Okay,
From this one.
yep, no problem.
Can I sit here or do I have to come down?
Just
I'll just
step in the other room there, so I know you, yeah, that'll be fine. Regular agenda, on item 1, we have Timber Trail Review, Request for Extension on Subdivision Map Submission for final subdivision approval for 6-lot subdivision. Said property is located with frontage along Route 32 and Timber Trail within the R-1A and LC zoning districts and is known on the Village of Woodbury tax maps as Section 237, Block 2, Lots 1.21 and 4.11. Please state your name for the record. Can you turn the microphone on, please?
Good evening. My name is Lorraine Potter. I'm with Lankin Tully Engineering. Dave Higgins had another meeting this evening, so I'm covering for him. We are here to request an additional extension for the Timber Trail subdivision. At this time, we are waiting for the finalization of the easements to be signed.
Rick, any thoughts, comments, or Dennis, what are we
Sure.
looking at?
There's two things going on at the same time, one of which is the easements. They were delivered to our office. We're reviewing those, and we're coordinating with the Board of Trustees for signature. That should happen in fairly short order. The other thing is that for a while, it was being held up because it was uncertain whether the Board of Trustees wanted to, on behalf of the village, to accept this parcel B as a donation to the village, an offer to the village. We have determined that the village has said, yes, they do want it. I have to look. I can't remember that there was a formal offer of dedication that was submitted to the Board of Trustees. I just can't recall. When I thought about this, I didn't have the file in front of me, so I'm not sure if they have provided a formal offer of acceptance or offer for acceptance of parcel B. So if Lankin Tully can also look into that to see whether or not that was done, and if not, then that should be prepared by Lankin Tully and then submitted to the Board of Trustees so that they can act upon that. But I think it is appropriate for an extension to be granted. They have been moving forward with this, especially of late. If you were to grant 2 90-day extensions, it would take you to your planning board meeting right around that time of April 18th, 2018. And that should be enough time to get all of these conditions complied with, so you can take final action on this application.
Okay. Dennis, you don't have anything else? Is April 18th our next, would be our second meeting in April?
Yes.
That's correct.
All right, when are the holidays, that week before or after, do you know? I know I'm asking a lot of questions here, I just want to make sure we're going to have a quorum and a board present here. Because I don't know when the holidays are yet in April.
Mine's not showing all that. Tax day, Earth Day.
That's the 15th, yeah. Everyone's looking. I just want to make sure.
Passover ends April 7th,
What ends on April 7th?
Passover, and I think Easter is
Oh, it's April 1st, my birthday.
even earlier.
Okay. All right, so April
Fool's Day,
18th.
I'll point out.
So is the 6-month extension okay that you're looking for?
Yes, please.
And I'm sorry, I didn't catch your first name.
Lorraine.
Lorraine, okay. Board members, any discussion of extending this to April 18th? All right,
good.
well, I'll offer a motion to extend extension to April 18th, 2018.
I second it.
All right, any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. So that's 4 yes, 1 abstention. Okay. All right, good luck.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Next item on the agenda is Bakertown Estates, review revised subdivision plan submitted for proposed 3-lot subdivision of property. Said property is located at 299 Bakertown Road in Highland Mills and is known on the Village of Woodbury tax maps as Section 213, Block 1, Lot 48. Just let me get my paperwork out. I'm not happy camper tonight. Okay. What plans are these? Please don't tell me I left it home. There it is. Okay. You're on.
All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is John Queenan from Lancatelli Engineering. Seems to be a common theme tonight. If you may recall, before you several months ago with a proposed 3-lot subdivision of an existing 8.8 acre parcel located at the corner of Bakertown Road and Seven Springs Road. And we had come to you with basically a sketch plan at that time, soliciting the board's comments. Since that time, we were supposed to appear before you last month, but we did not. We adjourned because we found that there was a restrictive covenant on the property with regards to water supply that my client/applicant was unaware of the general contents of that agreement when he purchased the property. So it's that old saying that you should read everything before you sign. So we took the time to research that. The applicant is still researching that with his attorney. But in the interim, we did receive your consultant's comments. We have addressed the plans. To date, we haven't resubmitted because I was waiting to appear before you tonight. But we'll be coming back for a resubmission with the plans that have addressed the majority, if not all, of the consultant comments, with the exception of the water agreement. And just to refresh your memory, we were doing 3 single-family dwellings on 2-acre lots. It's in the R2A zone. We have 3 driveway cuts all along Bakertown Road. And if you remember, initially, we had one off of Seven Springs Road. We eliminated that driveway cut, and we placed them all on Bakertown Road. We've graded out the subdivision. We've upgraded our designs for the septic fields. We filled it in with perk and deep tests. We've also taken the driveways. At the last meeting, the board, you had offered a concern about some additional parking spaces that you would like to have seen at the driveways. We've incorporated that into each lot, providing an additional 2 spaces in addition to the garages to the houses. We've delineated the limits of disturbance There was another concern. It's a heavily wooded lot, so it was a concern of, we want to try to limit the number of trees being taken down, so we've clearly delineated the areas. We've kept it to a minimum, providing, an ample backyard, obviously the septic system, the driveway, and the house footprint. I've provided a little bit larger house footprint than normal, just to accommodate for, any potential design changes down the road, and that would still fit within that footprint in order to preserve the trees on the site. With our new submission, we are going to be doing some screening in certain areas, typically right along where the old driveway was. We're going to fill that in with some screening, and we have a septic system that has to go in up here. We're going to provide some additional screening onto Seven Springs Road, so that basically we maintain this tree line all the way down. We maintain the tree line all the way along Bakertown Road, except obviously for where we have to cut in for the driveways. So, that's really where we are at this point. I think our next submission will pretty much address all of the comments. I know there's a couple waivers and items that deal with minor subdivision versus major subdivision that, if you'd like, we can get into tonight. The main one being that the code requires the board could potentially ask for a tree survey of the property, based that the entire property is wooded it's pretty dense woods. We would ask that the board consider to waive that requirement and instead enforce that, the limits of disturbance as shown on the map can't be extended or done further in the field without coming back to this board for reapproval. Because I think if we were to go out there, we'd be there for a couple weeks locating trees. The second waiver or discussion I'd like to have is with regards to ridge preservation and ARB. This is a minor subdivision, so technically the ARB doesn't apply to minor subdivisions under your code, but this property is within the ridge preservation overlay district. But at this time, the applicant doesn't have any plans for any houses, and he's going to sell them on a lot-by-lot basis. So we've been discussing with Jonathan some notes that hopefully he's comfortable with and the board will be comfortable with, supplying that we'll comply with the ridge preservation, and at the time, prior to obtaining a building permit, that individual owners who purchased the lot would come back to the planning board and have their plans reviewed for compliance of that preservation district. So that's pretty much where we are at this point. On the water easement or restrictive covenant, however you want to call it, the applicant is looking, and I defer to council, he's looking for some direction as to whether the agreement that he signed can be amended if this board has concerns with it, or if it should just be completely abolished. So that's kind of another question we'd like to try to address with council tonight. He was under the impression, because he didn't fully read the agreement, was that it was simply a water agreement for an outside user status, that he could approach the village of Kiryas Joel and obtain water if the water supply was in the area, and then it would be at his cost to bring water to the site. There's a lot more in that agreement than just that simplistic view of life there. So he's going to approach the village and try to remove certain sections of it, but we want to see what sections are of consequence, or have the covenant completely removed. So those are the two options.
Okay. Before we go to my consultants, back in February, we submitted to the Orange County DPW and Orange County Planning Department. April 24th, Orange County DPW, they responded back. Did you get a copy of that letter, John? Because there's things in here they want.
Yes, and that was based on an older layout that had a driveway coming off of Seven Springs.
All right, so then we need to resubmit the plans, Rick?
Correct.
With the newer plans?
Yes, I think that, you also took the preliminary steps in seeker, but I would hold off even assuming lead agency until you receive these revised plans. I think at that point in time, you re-refer it to the county under GML 239, and then you can assume lead agency once you've had an opportunity to look at the revised plans. There's also going to be a public hearing required, but obviously that has to wait until we work out some of these other issues.
Okay. All right, and then, in my file, John,
Yes.
I don't see an amended application appear before the planning board, because I know we had questions. Location of property says 299 Bakertown Road, says Monroe, New York, but it's really Highland Mills, New York. I don't see a revised plan. And it said property owner was Seven Springs Core
Correct.
/ LLC, and it has has the three names on here. But it's not I guess it is properly signed.
I believe the applicant should be.
Is Joel Mann the applicant?
Yes.
And-
Brock and Mann Associates should be the applicant, and it should have been Joel Mann
All right, so
signing.
could you make sure that we have a revised one?
Sure.
of
Yeah,
the-
because
so it's-
actually, the record owner on my plan has not been updated because it was sold subsequent in that period. So we'll clear all that up.
Yeah, so, all right, so it's been sold since
No,
February?
on the application, you have the correct
Okay.
record owner. On my plan, I didn't because they sold it after we did the
All right,
survey.
So we'll get a revised, and make sure, just do the applicant disclosure form so they're all dated correctly.
Okay.
All right, thank you. What else? All right, we'll go to Dennis.
Okay.
I don't know why I got two
Well, first
copies.
off, the
Did you-
plans that we reviewed were dated August 30th, and that's what our memo was written on. From what John was describing, it sounds like they've done additional work and they're going to submit additional plans. So I'm not going to dwell on everything in our report, because I think that hopefully our report was self-explanatory, and the applicant has changed some of those items, and they'll come in with a more complete plan. There are a few items, though, I might highlight. One is the bulk and regulations. There are deductions required in addition to slopes for wetlands, areas subject to flooding or ponding. That is a threshold issue for the applicant, just to make sure that they comply with the density requirements. And so they should check that early on in their review. The other item, I'm going to defer to Rick, that's the restrictive covenant. That, again, is a threshold issue because it seems to, in its current condition, would have a significant impact on their ability to proceed with what they're proposing with the wells on site. Water and wastewater, they're proceeding apparently and doing the testing required for wastewater. And if they don't put down the wells now and demonstrate adequate water supply, you have a mechanism for handling that, but you have not received or gone to final approval unless they do demonstrate water supply. But you can proceed to preliminary with a adequate provision to that effect. That is a condition on that. There are a number of other items. One is that landscaping issue in the tree plan. You've had this condition with other applications before when it's a densely wooded lot. It doesn't make sense, if you will, to try to do a tree survey, particularly if they show clear limits that show sufficient protection of the bordering areas where you're going to get the screening that actually the code intends to provide. But it's important then that the limits of disturbance be honored in the field, they be marked in the field, and that they represent a reasonable amount so that the work that's proposed can be completed. They had some areas there which were very narrow, and it looked like they'd have to do hand excavation. I don't think that's reasonable to expect from a developer, so they should show what they believe they can live with in terms of limits, and then be required to stay with that. There's one other legal item I think I had in here, and that was the existing dirt drive from Baker. Whoops.
The what?
From Bakertown Road, fading away there, from Bakertown Road through the property to the west. I just don't know if there are any access rights that other properties might have. It may just have been an old dirt trail, nobody uses it. But if there are any access rights for others, that ought to be discussed first by the applicant. If there's nothing, then we don't need a legal opinion. But if there is some access, or it's been used for for some time to provide access to other properties, that should be discussed. There are a number of other comments, like I said, we have in there, but I think that they're reviewing those and they're going to put them on additional submissions. So unless the applicant has any questions or you have any questions, that's all I have.
All right, thank you. Jonathan?
Yes, you'll see our memo was dated on September the 20th, and also based on those August plans. Now, our first comment tonight, Mr. Queenan's asked you folks for some waivers, but on the submittals, they weren't there weren't waivers requested, and they weren't on the face of those plans. So there is a requirement, and I'm sure by now the new plans have a list of the waivers that they're requesting, and then that way you can act on those, and there'll be a good record of that recorded. And the meets and bounds on the interior lines are required even at the preliminary stage. As far as the water supply issue goes, of course, we commented a lot on that situation. Before, Mr. Queenan was saying you should sort of tell what you want. I don't know that it's necessarily a matter of what water supply you would prefer, or whether you would like for the developer to exercise that agreement, but rather it's up to the developer to show that they can either get water from the site from wells for domestic water supply and fire protection, or that they can connect to a public water supply or put in some sort of centralized water system for the homes. But really, all that agreement does is show that there's a possibility that if subsequently this village, Woodbury, makes an agreement with the village of KJ, it's possible to set up a water district, and it's possible to then extend water. So it really just offers a possibility of getting water to the site, but not really, it doesn't, you haven't really been presented with a way to supply water. So our suggestion might be, since it could take quite some time to even get this agreement worked out, that maybe they should be proposing on-site provision of water and fire protection until such time as, it could be considerable amount of time, as some sort of extension of the KJ water system into this part of the village was worked out. We also mentioned that if you're inclined to grant a waiver on the tree marking and the surveying of every individual tree, that we would have no problem with that, as long as there was a condition of approval that no live trees be removed outside the shown limits of clearing. And we were asked about the architectural review board requirements. It does state that that you can ask for plans and go through the architectural review of the houses now. But being that this is a minor subdivision, you could waive that and then have conditions for the individual owners to come back to the board for the ridge preservation check and architectural review. But that would be up to you now that he has asked for that waiver. As far as seeker, you did send out a lead agency notification in March, but now that things are changing, I would defer to Rick's comments that he was making earlier to fix the seeker notifications and kind of backtrack on that and start it up again. And those are the comments from NPV.
Thank you.
If I may, Madam Chairwoman, if I could just address, just to clarify, the applicant didn't realize, like I said, he didn't realize what that water agreement actually entailed when he purchased the property. It was with the prior owner had signed it. It's our intention we're proposing wells and septics for each lot. Typical residential well and septic systems for each
But the
lot.
deed says no.
Well, the deed says no, but it's only if, like Jonathan was alluding to, that water is available, that the owner could approach the village and get the water from there. It's a
You
very,
say the village, KJ Village.
KJ, correct. Yeah, there's nothing to do with the village of Woodbury at this point, but the village of Woodbury is mentioned in the agreement. It's a very confusing, convoluted agreement.
It's,
So-
I mean, I've done deeds before.
But just
and
to
it's-
clarify, we have no intention of pursuing public water unless public water becomes available. And if it becomes available, then there's some mechanism that would be protruding that. It would be extension of a district or formation of a water district of that nature, or an outside user. We're proposing wells. I'm advising my client to abolish this agreement completely before we move on here. That's
Okay.
where we're at.
Rick? Because you know where I'm headed, but go ahead.
Actually, I'm not sure where you're headed,
Well-
but I'll let you know where I'm headed.
All right, first, go ahead.
First, a couple of things. I think it's a very good suggestion that your waivers be noted someplace, either in a separate document or on the plans, so we know exactly what you're asking to be waived. And with respect to the tree survey, are you saying to waive the tree survey completely, or just only have a tree survey in the area that's going to be disturbed?
We are requesting to waive it completely with the conditions that the limits of disturbance that are shown on the plan cannot be altered or extended in any manner unless you come back to the
Okay.
board.
Just for the planning board's consideration, is that, and I don't know this site, so maybe it's not really relevant depending upon what kind of trees are there. But it's somewhat typical when tree surveys are required, but they can be waived, is that planning boards would say, well, we'll waive it generally, however, we want, for instance, a survey of all trees larger than a certain amount in the area that's to be disturbed, so that you can determine that, well, maybe there's this specimen tree that's very large that as part of your site plan review, you would like to have preserved, and so maybe the clearing can be adjusted in order to save that particular tree or a stand of trees, et cetera. So that's something that you can consider once you get the request for the waiver, and you may want to take a site visit to determine, after you get those plans, to see whether or not it's worth having some sort of limited tree survey in order to assist you in determining whether or not the limits of clearing should be as originally proposed or as proposed in the revised drawings. The other one that I wasn't sure on, the way you just said it, John, was with respect to a waiver. ARB, I have no problem. The board doesn't have to do ARB until they have something before them, so they can give an
Correct.
approval without ARB. But I thought I heard you say that you wanted them to waive or defer ridge preservation analysis.
Well,
Is
not,
that right?
not waive or defer. We believe that we can address the ridge preservation through the notes and then have the applicant, because they have really no idea.
Notes in this application.
Notes on this subdivision map that restrict anyone going and pulling a building permit before they come back to the board to kind of tie in ARB with ridge preservation, because the applicant has no idea what kind of houses he wants to build, colors, roof lines.
True,
So
but, well, ARB, I understand that. Ridge preservation is a little different,
it's
all right?
it's a little different, but it still entails those parts.
You
No,
would still
no,
need
it's-
building details for the ridge preservation analysis as well.
What I'm,
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, many times, when you've dealt with ridge preservation, you're dealing with views from particular view corridors that are identified in the code. And there are some times when you can determine that with particular screenings, either naturally existing now or something that you believe is necessary, it almost doesn't matter what the houses look like because they're going to be screened and they're not going to be very visible because of that screening. So in that case, although the building aspects are important and sometimes with respect to the ridge preservation, they're not always. I would hesitate to have the board agree to deferring, which is in essence what's being asked, the ridge preservation analysis until after the subdivision is done. I think that there should be some form of ridge preservation looked at now to determine what are the potential problems or identification that there isn't any problem with respect to ridge preservation and the development that's being proposed. With respect to the restrictive covenant. This is not something, it's not our job, as has been stated, to go ahead and determine what should be requested by the applicant. What I can tell you is that although normally this board cannot enforce private restrictive covenants that exist, it's not your job to do so. However, it is your job when you're doing subdivisions to ensure that there is proper water for the site, or proper provision for water for the site. This restrictive covenant, I'm not sure that I would call it convoluted. I think it's actually rather clear. It's unusual, but it's rather clear, and it requires more than mentions the Village of Woodbury. Village of Woodbury is actually an active party in the way that this is drafted, in that you cannot use wells, it says. You have to get water from KJ, and KJ won't give you that water until the Village of Woodbury establishes a district, and as a village, they really can't establish a district. And also, the Village of Woodbury agrees that Village of KJ can provide water to the site. So, to me, this is a situation where, without the Village of Woodbury saying they would do all those things, one of which I think is an impossibility, as far as creating a district, you don't have a provision whereby water can be done for the site. So although it's not your job to enforce restrictive covenants, I think also you cannot look the other way and pretend like this restrictive covenant doesn't exist, because if this restrictive covenant exists with respect to this vital resource of water, and it's enforced, and you've approved this with wells, well, now you've approved a subdivision that has no way to get water. And so I think it's incumbent upon the applicant to go ahead and present you with something where there is a viable way to provide water to the site, either because the agreement has been modified in such a way, or abandoned, or dissolved, so that wells can be put on the site in which you can move forward, or there is some other clear path that gives them an absolute right to get water from a municipal source. I think as it exists now, you don't have either one of those, and therefore I don't think that this is a matter that this board can approve while that restrictive covenant remains in effect as it is. I do agree with Dennis that in fact we need to know whether there are any other easements or other access rights across the existing dirt drive. And I think I've answered all the questions that I wanted to have waived. Wanted to have raised. I do think we need to have a re-referral for the GML, as I said earlier. And that's it.
And I'd like to just amplify on something that Rick raised on the ridge preservation. In our memo, we also had recommended that ridge preservation be addressed now, but if the future, if you were going to be waiving architectural review till buyers came forward with their house plans, it would probably, you'd have to re-examine the ridge preservation standards then, when you knew how tall the house would be and where it would be placed, and then it might need to be moved over or something, and the clearing limits change. So in order to assure meeting the ridge preservation standards, you also will need to know how tall a house and how big a house, and its color and the material of the shingles and other issues of that nature, that the developer at this time hasn't done anything other than define footprint areas.
Okay, thank you. Robert, thoughts or
Yes,
concerns? Why don't you, go ahead, you take it.
I think that I read that if the wells were drilled on the property, that covenant would require that they be dedicated to Kirs Joel. Is that right? Did I read that correctly? That they would
I'm
be-
sorry, Robert, I was talking with
Oh,
Dennis
okay.
on a related
That
issue.
if wells were drilled on that property, the subdivision, that that water would have to be dedicated to Kiris Joel under the restrictive covenant.
That's the way it's worded, yes.
Yeah, I mean, what would be the legal right for any community to do that to another community in the sense, because it's in another community's property?
Well, it's not so much one municipality versus another, it's any kind of party, and there were, I believe at one point in time, that the village had a restriction on the exportation of water resource outside of the village that is prohibited. I wasn't part of the litigation, but I think there was litigation that ended up that says that that could not be enforced. And that was just confirmed by the trustee,
Okay, thank you.
I
Anything
don't
else?
agree with it, but that's what the court said.
No, that's it.
Sandy? Chris, you have anything?
I have a question. Are you aware if this restrictive covenant goes beyond this property, and does it affect any other properties?
Yes.
Okay.
It affects a number of other properties that I've worked on in Woodbury, Monroe. It is prevalent around the area.
So you have another application before us currently,
For,
Lake Avenue? Is that
correct.
you? I'm just gonna, does this have the same
I don't know,
water
I'll have to
restriction?
look. We pick it up when we do the surveys,
We'd
it
have to
comes
look
up,
at that.
but I have seen it before.
All right.
And if I could just follow that. Rick, it wasn't my intent to have you, tell me exactly what to do, so I apologize. But you're.
I didn't take that
Yeah,
as
yeah.
you dumping it on me, I just wanted to make it clear for the
Yeah,
record,
but-
I understand.
Yeah, but your answer to the board was exactly what I needed. So,
Okay.
Thank you.
No, I can't find it. It says something here about annexation. What page? I can't find it now.
Towards the beginning.
Towards the beginning. Rich, anything?
The only thing I have is, how far do we go with this subdivision without knowing what's going to happen with the covenant restrictions? That's,
I don't know why I can't
If
find
I,
it.
not very far, in my
yeah,
opinion.
that's my point.
That's why I came here, I didn't come here last month to research that, and I came here tonight just to let you know, we're still working on this, and we're working to get that covenant resolved. I know the board can't
Why can't I find
really
it?
do much tonight at all, but it was just really just to bring you up to speed of
Okay.
where we are.
Just a question.
All right, I'm having trouble finding something I wanted to ask you, Rick, but in regards to the water supply, we're gonna put that on hold right now until we get more clarification on this, because this deed is for Baker Valley Associates. I'd like to see the current deed to the current owner. Because this deed that I'm showing is Village of Kirs Joel to Baker Valley Associates. Baker Valley Associates is no longer with this, they sold it to,
They sold it to 7 Core.
all right, so I need to see that new deed,
Sure.
if it's, you know.
It does carry over.
It carry,
right?
unless they changed it, what section, number 4? Okay, so we definitely need to have the revised deed. Where is it, under water?
Yeah, the covenant runs with the property, but we'll get you.
Okay, so we need to have the deed, waiving of the ARBs, that we can discuss later, but the ridge preservation. What's the elevation right now? It's about 600?
Above.
Above, all right, so we don't waive ridge preservation with testing and balloon testing pictures and all that, and I'm not going to start that practice as myself. I don't know how the rest of the board feels. Robert?
I agree.
Sandy? Chris? With ridge preservation. We've never, I'm talking about overlay pictures, balloon testing, we've never waived ridge preservation. And we've done this for properties that are
Yeah,
over there, so I wanted.
Maria, you
Well-
clearly have never waived ridge preservation review. You have requested different things
Different
depending
things.
upon the circumstances of the particular property, sometimes requiring more, sometimes requiring less.
Correct.
Simply because of the nature, but certainly you've never waived, and I don't think that you have the power under the
process,
code to
right.
waive ridge preservation review.
And I wasn't requesting to waive it, I was requesting to address it with notes on the subdivision plan and then require the applicants to come back. And only because it relates to the specifics of the architecture of the buildings.
Well, some of it does, but some
Some
of
of
it,
it, does,
some of it
yeah,
does. Yeah,
some
so
of it
that's-
does.
But on
In that
another-
respect,
on
give me a
another-
moment, please. In that respect, with the ridge preservation, I would like to see something done before we even get to individual ARBs. I need to know beforehand where this is going to be impacted. That's my job as a planning board member, to see where everything, where the land lies. I need to see it. My other thing is with the tree survey. We've done tree surveys before where we said certain, was it like a 4-inch or 5-inch tree? You'll have to go back to one of the properties on Smith Clove Road, Jonathan. I forgot what the size of the tree was, because it's visible. This is an intersection that's quite visible in traffic. It connects two villages together, and there are the residences there, and we have a lot of applications before us where people are going to be living there, and which brings me to the point of traffic. This is a heavily trafficked road, Bakertown to Seven Springs, with school buses, traffic that comes from Monroe over from 208 to Seven Springs and comes down the hill, and from Bakertown for about north to Seven Springs. And in one of the sections, it says not heavily trafficked, where it has, by Campbell. That's starting to be an active driveway. I've had people come to me and talk to me about there's active cars coming in and out of that driveway, because there's a business down in there. And so we have to look at all this. I want to look at traffic. The tree survey, we have to come up with some kind of a suggestion where the building envelope is going to be. The stone wall, and in reading this deed, the village of Kirs Joel saying that they want possible easement for water lines, which may compromise the stone wall that we want to be kept in place. So there's a lot of things with this deed, with what we're talking about. So these are my opinions, that we need to look at all of it, not just piecemeal. Where did I leave off? I know I left off with you, Chris, but with the ridge preservation, Rich?
I never answered.
Go ahead, Chris. You were starting to, but I cut you off. I'm sorry.
I agree that the ridge preservation is something we have to address, but I
Right.
want to make sure that our process stays in place and we have options as to what we require, that's all.
Okay.
just a suggestion along those lines. I mean, one thing that can be done, well, first of all, I think that you ought to come up with a plan. I think what you're saying is that you never saying that you wanted to completely defer it, but you wanted to address it somehow here.
Correct.
So I think what you ought to do is, before you actually perform it, you go ahead and come up with a plan on how you're going to address it so the board can weigh in and decide whether or not that's appropriate for them. I think one of the ways that you might consider is to have, hypothetical 35-foot buildings.
Yeah,
even
actually, here, I'm coming up with a plan in my mind, and I was going to propose to the board, the applicant will complete a tree survey within our proposed limits of disturbance. And we'll get all the trees that are 8 inches in diameter and greater. And the 8 inches matches your
Well, we
your
didn't
ridge.
say, we didn't agree on a diameter yet.
Well, no, I'm just saying, the 8 inches is in the ridge preservation code now. So I'm trying to work a solution here. So we would
Okay.
locate all the trees within the limits of disturbance that are 8 inches and greater as per the ridge preservation code. And we could give you generic house cross-sections and elevations, just as long as they weren't taken to be the final cross-sections, elevations, and colors and materials to be used, because they would just simply be generic. And I think that could get us through that ridge preservation
Right. So
section.
I think you make those proposals in writing to the board, and then they can react to that, give it some thought, and then we can agree upon a final way that the board believes you can address both of those issues.
Okay, the only thing is, if I could be a little pushy tonight, is could we decide on the trees now so that I could get that work done and on the plan rather than come back and settle the trees again?
All right, just,
You wouldn't necessarily need anything less than 8-inch diameter. I mean, you're talking about specimen trees, I would have even gone larger, but if they're willing to do 8-inch trees, you'll be able to determine whether there's any specimen tree you might want to save within that envelope. One of the things that might happen is, for example, the road coming in, the driveway coming in, they've done that in a certain fashion. The way you set up the driveway hides the house in the back, provides ridge preservation. So when you look at that, if that's cutting through a very, a 24-inch tree that you wanted to save, they could move that a little bit. It's going to be hard to do it in the building envelope. Maybe they can move a little bit if it's on the periphery, but one in the center, probably not. But at least you'll know. But I would say if they're willing to do 8-inch diameter, all along the areas of the clearing, you would have the information. And you probably should go a little bit beyond that, because if they want to tweak it because they want to save a tree, you're going to want to know whether they're moving into something that we don't want to move into. So my recommendation would be that that would be adequate. That'd be good.
all right, I know
I
it.
concur.
And Rich, I know I didn't get to you about the ridge preservation. I didn't get that down that far. Any thoughts or concerns about that?
No, I like what the engineer just said. He's coming back with
Okay.
would you conceptual?
Yeah, basically,
Yeah,
generic
yeah.
conceptual.
Okay.
Yeah.
Another thing that it's saying page 6 of 12 on this deed, under number 5, where it says Woodbury Village Water District Formation. Letter A, unless the development site is annexed to the village, which is referring to KJ, the outside users shall petition the Board of the Village of Woodbury to form a new water district to include the development site. Just keep that comment in your mind, Rick, okay? Because when you start putting in deeds about being annexed, it raises little red flags in my mind here. We're going to see if the deed that's currently filed is similar or changed. And deed, preservation, survey, traffic. And we have to take a look at that. What else did I have written on here? And that'll be enough for tonight. Oh, where Lot 3 is located? Above that is the treatment plant that Curious Joel has for their pipeline. Rick, under no circumstances can these 3 properties tap into that pipeline, correct? If they're in Woodbury? Where the treatment plant is above Lot 3, which is on Seven Springs Road. To gain access to water, these 3 lots cannot tap into that pipeline. Because Woodbury cannot tap into that pipeline, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. I haven't looked at
Okay.
who has authority to tap into that or not.
That's something
All
to,
right.
that was one of my other concerns, was the tapping into the pipeline, if we can
Okay, but
check
right-
into that.
Right now, what the applicant is proposing is to try to do away with the limitations on the restrictive covenant and instead simply drill wells, private wells that will serve only these properties, as I understand it.
That's correct.
Okay. Board members, any other thoughts, concerns? Did I miss anybody? Consultants? All right, I guess we'll wait till we get revisions and more explanations. But, board members, if you do take a ride out there, the best time during school hours, from 6 in the morning to 9:30 in the morning, from constantly all day from another school district, and then again from 2 o'clock to 5 o'clock. That intersection with buses, we may have to do a traffic study. I'm sorry.
Can we address the tree issue, so he has some direction?
All right, let's
That's
go
all.
there to the tree issue. So tree issue, we're gonna go with 8-inch per the code within the building envelope. Correct?
Actually,
Yes.
I would
no, the
Suggest
a little
within
bit
the
over.
clearing limits.
limits of disturbance.
Limits of disturbance,
Plus a
okay.
little bit so that they can move.
Plus 10 feet,
Yeah.
or-
10 feet would be good, both sides, yeah.
That's fine.
Okay. So we're good with that? Anything else?
I just want to understand, so the next time you come back, the restrictive covenant is going to be worked out? That issue is going to be worked out?
Correct,
Okay,
correct.
all right.
So you may not see us for a little while, or you could see us in a few weeks. That's out of my
Yeah,
hands.
I think I had the same concerns as Rich, that I just don't want to move this thing through
Yeah,
without
I don't either,
having.
because it's.
Okay,
I guess that's the first thing, and then we'll take everything else into
Correct, and
consideration.
I just wanted the trees because we get a lot of snow or something, it's important to
Okay.
get those located.
All right, if that's everything,
Okay,
you're good to go.
great, thank you.
You're welcome. Just for those who are in the audience and for those on TV, when they get to view this rather on YouTube, the Highland Mills Center was on the agenda for tonight, and the applicant sent us a letter that they requesting to be rescheduled to planning board's second meeting. So I just want to let that know for the public. So the next item on the agenda is Central Valley Properties, reviews revised site plan, EAF, and traffic study submitted for the proposed construction of a two-story mixed-use building and parking lot expansion. Said property is located at 252 Route 32 in Central Valley and is known on the Village of Woodbury tax maps as Section 230, Block 7, Lot 17 through 19. Good evening.
Madam Chair, I'm going to recuse myself on this application.
Yep. Just give me a moment to get my paperwork. Oh, good Lord. Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Wonderful.
You set?
I'm there. Go ahead.
Okay. A couple things. As you know, one of the things that we had to do is to go to the Zoning Board of Appeals. There's two items. One is an area variance, which we could not proceed any further with the ZBA until seeker is concluded. But the other showstopper for us was the discrepancy in front yard setback. There's one section of the code, or our bulk requirements for the Hamlet Business Zone has a specific way on how to determine the front yard setback, but it was in conflict with another section of the code that stated that any lot that fronts on a state or county highway has a minimum front yard setback of 50 feet. Which for us was devastating and would be devastating for most of the Hamlet lots, or lots located within the Hamlet district, because most of them are small and many of them are on state and county highways. So the zoning board of appeal opined that the bulk requirements for the HB zone took precedent over the other section of the code, which didn't, we were allowed to proceed with the proposed building location as originally shown on the site plans. For those of you that may not remember, it's a mixed-use building. It's located in the Hamlet zone. The site is 1.57 acres. It has 3 tax parcels. At the conclusion of this process, we will file a lot consolidation plan, making one lot, which would have both buildings on it. There's the existing building, the bank building, which is about 2,400 square feet. The proposed building has a footprint of a little over 8,600 square feet. First floor being mixed use, second floor being residential, which would be 4 two-bedroom units and 4 one-bedroom units. We believe the proposal is very consistent with the purpose of the HB zone, which promotes the mixed-use development of the hamlets, and that's just what we're doing. We've also, as part of the process, with this application, we had submitted to you revised site plans based on comments received previously, revised EAF, based on comments received previously, and a traffic report. And that's where we are.
Thank you. Dennis,
Yes.
would you like to?
Okay, we provide you with a memo. I'm not going to go through all the details. I'll just point out a few items. As Steve said, they did receive the interpretation, but they need to go back for the density variance here. And we provided a table, and in looking at the information that they provided in their parking analysis, it appears, and I talked to Gary about this too, there are a number of uses that are proposed, and each additional use requires an additional 10,000 square feet. So the retail spaces would require 10,000 square feet. The restaurant use would require 10,000 square feet. The apartments are not a use-based, they are individual-based. So you have, for every apartment, you require 6,000 square feet per unit. And then the existing building, which is the TD Bank, says retail or office. I'm assuming it's going to be one or the other, therefore there would only be a 10,000 square foot requirement. But the applicant ought to make sure of that, because if they're going to propose both on different floors or something like that, then they should get approval when they go to the ZBA or talk to them about the variance they need. Because what this ends up being is, you add up all the uses, we have 78,000 square feet. I checked it with Gary, that would be his interpretation as well. And the net area is 64,248, and that's the variance they would be seeking from the ZBA. The ZBA will be looking at that, but it's incumbent upon the applicant to make sure that what we've listed here reflects what they propose to do. If they were eliminating the restaurant, then they wouldn't need that 10,000.
Right, the only thing I would say, Dennis, on this is right now we have a tenant in the existing building, and it's a professional office. So we would actually, under this scenario, we would deduct 10,000 square feet, because you don't have to provide, you could have all office or offices, but it's only 10,000 square feet per use. It's not per tenant. So we had originally had retail office, but we do have a tenant with a long-term lease for the bank. But
Wait.
again,
I'm not quite following that. If that's an office use, that would be a new
Then it's
use, so that would be 10,000. The apartment uses, you know what those are. Then you have a restaurant and a retail. If you told me it was another retail use on the site and it matched the other retail use, then I would say Gary might interpret that as one retail
Correct.
use, even though it's in two different buildings. But that's not what I'm hearing. It's an office use.
correct.
Yeah.
So then
So I
it's-
think that the numbers I gave you are correct
No,
for
I
your
stand
current
corrected, you're right.
proposed use. Even if you eliminate the 10,000, you'll still be going for a modest variance between 68 and 68,000, 64,000. It's only a matter of the degree, well, it's not only a matter, it's the matter of the degree of variance you go, but you should make sure that it reflects whatever your client intends. And so you don't have to go back. As far as, let's see, parking, they have assigned a certain area for the parking. And parking that they're proposing matches what's required under the code. Since they have assigned a certain area for the restaurant, they couldn't apply more area to the restaurant because it would require additional parking. This kind of defines how much parking, how much area can go to a restaurant use. That's just informational. I recommend that this go to the ESOs fairly soon, because if they have any demands or requirements on circulation through the lot or anything along those lines, the applicant ought to know it at the earliest stage.
Right. And if, this is actually, Dennis references this item twice in the letter, and it's been a kind of a carryover, so we would like to do that sooner than later as well, so we can put that to bed.
So, Madam Chairman, if you want to authorize that later, we can set up a meeting for that. Okay. The loading zone, they've shown may be an appropriate loading zone here. They've shown on the side of the building. And what they're saying is that in a traditional hamlet area like this, a village, that offloading on the side like that and taking dollies down and bringing them into the stores would be a normal way of deliveries. What you'd like to do is provide an area that is reasonable for people to offload and to bring it in the stores, so they don't end up parking right in front of the doors or trying to get it off 32 or having some issues with inconvenient loading zones. So you should take a look at this and make sure that it's what you expect. Also, I don't know how they're going to do this, because they're going to have doors on both sides. I think the one on 32 is to make it a nice front, and you expect probably the significant traffic for customers to come in from the rear.
Correct.
Okay. If that's the case, then the question is, where will they do the loading? Because these stores, you know, they want to take loading in one side. They don't want to necessarily commingle with the customers. So you're going to have to figure out how that works, best case. But I'm not suggesting that you put a loading door on the 32 side, because I don't think it's going to be attractive. I think what they're proposing, they want to make an attractive-looking building and have a nice frontage on 32, and I think that's desirable. So you just got to work out something so they can have a reasonable way to provide goods and services to the building. I'm going to defer all the traffic
Do
issues.
you mind if we,
Go ahead.
I'd just like to discuss some of these issues, just to see if we can put them, get a check at that box. Just, so if you're familiar with what we're proposing, is Route 32, this area here is indented approximately 15 feet from the curb line to where trucks or vans could pull over.
Just bring the microphone a little closer to you. Thank you.
Where vans or trucks could pull over out of the traffic and then access the building to make any deliveries. You know, we feel that this is adequate. It's a hamlet. You know, we do a lot of work in villages, and you know, you kind of have to improvise deliveries because you can't really provide what you consider a loading dock or a loading zone under sort of similar commercial uses. It's a small scale site, and you know, we don't think that that's too far to walk for, you know, UPS man, and again, we don't think that, you know, most of this, if it's offices, it's going to be UPS, Federal Express. If there's a restaurant, you may get 1 or 2 deliveries during the day from a small truck, box truck. Those are typically done in the mornings early. So we feel that this facility will address the loading and delivery needs for the facility.
And just in that respect, with deliveries with trucks, we would probably, I'm probably going to request this later on, for the traffic to look at it. No offloading of deliveries on Route 32 or Estrada Road. So if a large truck comes in for food delivery, it cannot offload in the middle of 32.
Right.
Or Estrada.
We'd be
because
more
it
than
just-
happy to put a map note on the plans,
Yeah.
restricting that, Estrada
Yeah.
and 32, not a problem at all. We agree with you, we
Because
don't think that would
right
be
now, that
inappropriate.
intersection is
Busy enough.
busy. I'll say busy. I won't use the word horrendous, but I just did, but
Right.
it's quite busy. All right. Where do we leave off?
Okay, couple other things. There's a traffic analysis here. I'm going to defer on that, obviously. But as far as the parking on site, I really think we ought to have some discussion. We talked about marking stalls. They're going to have tenants here. They're going to have customers for the retail stores. And if they designate spaces for the retail stores, I'm not sure, or for the tenants, I'm not sure how that works in conjunction with the overall functioning of the site. But I think that they ought to provide some kind of a plan. If there's certain areas that are going to be designated for tenants, they can mark that out. And just to make sure that it kind of works. If you have someone moving that has 4 cars, they try to store cars there, that could be a problem. So maybe they need to have it designated. But in any event, with a shared use like this, it's intended to be shared, but I think you should have some kind of a general plan and how they intend to do that. I think I saw the notes from last time. It said that the spaces would be marked somehow. Is that your intent?
We probably will not do that. What we'll do, it's going to be handled, it's typically handled through leases. The residential leases, if it's a 1-bedroom, it may get 1.2 spaces, the 2 bedrooms may get 2 spaces. It'll prohibit the storage of vehicles in the parking lot from future residents. We will control that. Also, if you look at, and then the commercial use, it's again depending on the end user, but we would likely not restrict parking for any of the commercial tenants we'd like to keep the lot flexible because the idea is that the residential and the commercial are going to be, the demands are going to be in different schedules. So we don't want to tie up a half a dozen or a dozen parking spaces for residential and not have those ability for not having, so if you look at our traffic report, our peaks during the parking period are in the afternoon. I think the ultimate day was a Saturday or a weekday in December, which required 66 parking spaces. So if we're designated spaces for residences, then we can't meet the demands for that peak parking requirement. So we would prefer to not designate spaces and leave it flexible. Because we think in this type of situation, you've got different demands at different times, and we think it would work better without any restrictions.
Of course, that's all going to depend on who their customers are and who their tenants are.
Right.
If they have a section for restaurant use, that restaurant use will probably overlap with the tenants more. But if there's an office space, the office space will probably be clearing out when the restaurant starts getting busy. If there's a regular retail store there, that'll probably be, during the day, but it all depends on what that retail store is and what the hours are that they keep. So that we'll have to see. But they meet the code requirements for parking. A few other things, water and sewer, I won't bore you with, but we had a few comments in there, and I'm sure they'll provide us with the information we needed. Stormwater management needs to be provided. They're probably going to have to do something underground or whatever. I don't know exactly how they're going to handle the stormwater, but they'll have to review that, and that's something that's not in there yet. One thing that we did note is that there's a drain in the center of the parking lot, and water runs to the center of the parking lot. Steve, that doesn't generally work for me, because if you pile snow around the sides, it comes down and you get an ice pond. So I think you really need to look at something that goes back to the curb line, and you keep water at the curb line. Landscaping and lighting, a few items there we're asking you to take a look at, make sure there's no glare. The signs, they provided some interesting plans previously, architecturals. Have they changed at all, Steve, or is it still that same architectural? Okay. Well, the architectural showed proposed signs, tenant signs, just generically, and it had some nice goose light fixtures, looked pretty nice. If you want that, you should look at that, and under your ARB, if that's what you want, agree with the applicant that that's, what you'd approve. Architectural review, that's what I talked about. ESOs, that's what Steve mentioned, I mentioned twice, so I'll
Dennis?
mention it a third time.
ESOs,
Yes.
November 14th, we have a meeting already at 1 o'clock, so maybe 2:30, 3 o'clock. I don't know how long the first one's going to be.
Okay, I will speak to Maria and see if she can organize something for the 14th. You say 2:30 to 3?
How long do you think the first meeting's going to be? It's at 1 o'clock. You think we're going to need at least an
Oh,
hour?
that's going to be a while.
So
We probably
maybe
ought to
3
try to
o'clock?
get this one before, because this one's only going to
No, I
take.
can't. I'm busy
Oh.
that morning. That's why we've made this at 1 o'clock. Since the two of you are down this way, can we talk to Maria, see if we can do something at 3 o'clock?
We can.
All right? So that you gentlemen don't, the two of you don't have to come traveling.
Okay.
And we'll probably have to have traffic there as well. Do we need traffic there for the ESO meeting or not?
I don't
No?
think, I don't think
Okay.
so. I think the ESOs, frankly, I'm only there as a note taker, pretty much, because the ESO, I mean, I described something
Well,
about it.
you're more than
but-
that.
Yeah, but the ESOs have their own requirements. We hear a lot of the same things. They're very consistent
Yep.
on their requirements, fire lanes, no parking areas,
I'd-
marking
I'd-
the doors,
Also, we need the Woodbury Village Highway Department there, because they're going to be cut out onto Estrada.
Sure.
Natalie, can you remember to include them on the referrals, and also the Woodbury Police on these referrals? Because they're missing.
See, Natalie, she knows I'm not going to remember.
Hey, I know who to talk to, come on, we got to stay together. But if you can, on the 14th, see, Dave, no, why did I say Dave? Steve, just keep that in your mind, I don't know if you, I know.
I got it.
All right?
Yep.
May as well make it a whole afternoon. All right. Anything else, Dennis?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
H.
All right, Jonathan, you're up. Yay.
Okay, I won't
Yeah. if
plow
not,
the
Dennis-
same ground that
right.
Dennis just went through. We agree on the analysis of the minimum lot size and the need for that variance still outstanding. At the last review, there was talk that perhaps a driveway width variance
You
was
didn't
needed,
get a
but this set of plans now shows 25 feet of width. So if that's the case, then there's no variance needed. It meets the standard. On the parking lot, they've redesigned with 90-degree spaces. There's now shown a 25-foot travel aisle, so that, that still meets the 25-foot standard. However, we did have an issue with the handicap parking spaces. I understand how it happened, but it doesn't really make sense that the handicap spaces are shown as 8 by 25. They're the narrowest spaces in the lot. All the other parking spaces are 9 feet wide, and the handicaps are 8 feet wide. And we would recommend that the handicap spaces be the same width as all the other ones. Also, the way they show the striping, the handicap spaces stick out extra feet. And in that area of handicap parking, the aisle width is narrower than 25. So I would look at that design. Also, there's this 10 feet buffer requirement between the residential district in the rear of the property and any parking. And there are some spaces along the DeCastro and Taft property lines where there's a dumpster pad that violates that 10-foot. And there's a couple places where the curb and little slivers of parking are closer than 10 feet to the residential districts in the back. And rather than have to ask for a variance, we feel that the design could just be adjusted a few feet and could simply comply. Same with the buffering and screening. At the last meetings, it was discussed that perhaps they would be asking ZBA for a variance on buffering and screening. But looking at the landscape architect plan for landscaping, we think that rather than ask for a variance from any standards, they would just thicken that up to meet the opaque or thick standard that's in section 31042C. It requires an opaque wall, fence, or thick hedge. That was our comment there. On the traffic study, we're not going to make comments on sort of the engineering piece of traffic, but rather those aspects that involve planning. We noticed that the traffic study bases the peak demand for parking on this model that the office and retail use will be split 50-50, exactly. It models everything based on roughly 4,750 square feet of retail versus office. But when you look at the plans and you look at the size of the tenant areas, it doesn't necessarily make sense that that's how it would turn out. But I guess we would want either a condition that if you're going to base the shared parking on a 50-50 split, that needs to be the split. Otherwise, everything would have to get amended. Or if the split is going to end up being, 35-65 or something like that, then the traffic and parking calculations need to be adjusted to sort of meet the actual pattern of tenant spaces. Also, the traffic engineer had used the fast food category of restaurant, and the site plan just refers to a regular restaurant. So these sort of nuances we'd like to get cleared up. Nothing too drastic, but in that vein, we agree that this is a very good case for shared parking, that it's not necessary to have too many parking spaces here, and we do believe that in the hamlets, a shared parking is to be expected and a good thing, but we would like to see better justification for how the parking will be shared. They kind of just say, oh, we followed ULI standards, but there's no description of how the uses will complement each other and how one use will have higher demand when another use has lower demand, and how it will all work out. We had also recommended that employee and apartment tenant parking spaces be designated, and Mr. Esposito was saying that, no, they want to keep everything flexible. And I guess we wouldn't necessarily argue against flexibility, but would like to see more justification of how the sharing of parking will work out, and that the traffic engineer's assumptions on splits between the uses all hang together with the pattern and square footage of different proposed uses on the site plan. We also look forward to seeing more on utilities and drainage. And also, we noted that in the EAF, that the description of the proposed action should be clarified with the square footages of restaurant, office, and retail. Right now, the EAF just says commercial use square footage. It doesn't break that out. So those are the comments from NPV.
Thank you. Rick?
Sure, just two basic comments. One is, as Steve noted, the ZBA cannot move forward with the second variance that they are considering until seeker is done. Your next step in seeker is to make a determination of significance. It's going to be up to the board whether or not you have enough information, including traffic issues, to make that determination of significance either now or soon. So that's something that you have to consider. Secondly, Dennis had raised in his memo about the screening, that there's a code requirement that screening be done, as also mentioned, by an opaque fence or wall. And also it says, or this thick hedge. But it has to be between 5 and 6.5 feet, which of course makes a lot of sense when you're talking about a fence or a wall. It's difficult when you're talking about landscaping to be exactly between 5 and 6.5 feet, but that's what the code says. The applicant is wondering, and Dennis queried, whether or not there's a waiver in the code for this provision. We have looked at that, and there is no waiver provision that can be used. So they can either do a fence and comply, or they can obtain a variance. You know, if they're going to be before the ZBA wrapping things up there, they can certainly add they might want to, it's up to them. But that issue of the height certainly can be adjusted by way of an area variance by the ZBA. And that's all I have.
A question on that. So if they plant a 5-foot tree and it grows to 10-foot tree, I would rather see landscaping than an opaque wall. I mean, we're going to have to submit something to the village board about our code.
Well, I think
I'm
that
Gary
Gary
sorry.
would, yeah, you can do that, and certainly the code can be modified. In the interim,
But in the interim, we're stuck.
Gary could certainly interpret the code to say either it always has to be between 5 and 6.5 feet, so someone has to
Okay.
go out and constantly trim it, or simply that it be between 5 and 6.5 feet when you approve it. And that's something that is subject to interpretation, so Gary could make that kind of determination. This board can't, but Gary could.
Okay. All right, so the applicant knows what he has to
And
do.
if it truly is a thick hedge, it's not really out of line to maintain it at a particular height each
Yeah.
year. It's not going to grow over 1.5 feet during the
I'm
season.
just being, you know what to do. Anything else, Rick?
No.
Hello.
Good evening.
How are you? How are you, John?
Okay, good.
I know you came in late on this project since it was before us, but thank you
Okay.
for getting some report done for us.
All right, we have
So
some,
you had,
we have-
you've seen this report?
yes, we've done the
Okay.
report, we have a comment letter.
Yep.
The.
Do you have a
comment-
microphone?
The comment letter goes into several different categories. The first category is with respect to the traffic volumes, the existing traffic volumes. The counts were taken in August, which is not a peak time period. We're recommending that they be recounted. At the very least, we suggest that they be recounted during the evening peak hour, the rush hour, which is based upon all historical data is the worst of the period, and in fact is the period where they have the poorest level of service, even using the August counts at their driveway. So we would suggest if you don't do them all, we would prefer to see them all, but if you want to just do a sensitivity on the worst case, we would look at recounting currently the PM peak hour. We tend to agree with the applicant that while the 2% growth is there, they haven't included other projects. The larger project that's coming in is the gardens, but I think this project will occur prior to when traffic from the gardens, so normally it would be after. So unless the board has any specific projects they want to have the applicant include, as far as background, we're satisfied with the way they did the approach. With respect to the traffic generation, and not with respect to the parking, but with respect to the traffic generation, the IT just came out with the 10th edition as opposed to the 9th edition. We suggest that the applicant just compare the trip rates for the various categories, 9th to the 10th edition. The DOT, we have no difficulty with the credits the applicant's taken because of the mixed use, type use, especially being in the village. There should be some correspondence with the DOT to make sure they're on board, since they're going to be approving the driveway. And in fact, because of the location of driveway, with respect to other signalized locations, the DOT may in fact have a restriction. I'm not even sure whether the DOT will allow a curb cut to 32. So that has to be checked out early, because normally DOT says if you have access to a side road, they would prefer to not have an access to a state highway. So that should be confirmed before we go too far down the pike. And with respect to the parking, the peak hour was, I think it was December, it was the peak. I suggest for the board's information that the same type of analysis that was done for the peak condition be done for normal or off-peak conditions. In other words, non-December, non-peak, et cetera. So right now, you show that you need X number of spaces, and you just meet that X number of spaces, which means if somebody parks over the line, that space no longer exists, okay? I'd like to have the board with some idea whether or not during normal course of events, the number of spaces that are going to be utilized is 50 as opposed to the time period during December. And the last one, I tend to agree with the indication that there should be some way of designating parking areas. One way we've found successful in the high turnover areas where you expect to have retail. Once you put signs, instead of saying reserved for retail, you just put down a sign that says parking limit 2 hours. So that means that's going to be the turnover area. The other areas can either be used for office or residential, which is further away from the building pad. So you don't want to have the office person coming in the morning and sitting in a prime space is going to be the high turnover, should be the high turnover space for the restaurants and the other uses. And with respect to the drop-off zone, the loading zone, I think it's necessary where it is. I'm afraid of any backing out to the 32. I would suggest that the bump out on the site side be eliminated and just put striped in there, because that would give you additional storage. I calculate you have room for about one truck in there, and if the second truck comes in, where do they park? So by getting rid of that front, just carrying the striping, not on the 32 side, but inside the site, you get an extra 15 spaces, 15 feet that could be used for things get tight. And again, as was commented on, I think with respect to the parking, I think the traffic engineer should do the worst case for the traffic. So for example, if the parking requirements for retail is greater than that for office, that should be the one used for the potential use of that building, if you want to cover all potential uses. So instead of 50/50, put 100% on the worst case. And if you do have the driveways to 32, I think the driveway as shown, the 32 does not meet the current standards for DOT with respect to curb radii. So you may want to take that into account. That's generally the summations of the parking requirements.
Yep, thank you. You dropped something on the floor. You dropped some, okay, there you go.
I heard.
You heard it, right.
Thank you.
Rich, I'm going to start with you. Thoughts, concerns, questions?
The TD Bank area, those people park in the back today?
Correct. Yeah.
I'm just wondering, looking at the number of possible retail stores and a restaurant and the number of apartments, I know you did the calculation, Dennis, but it seems like if you have 4 or 5 retail and a restaurant and the TD Bank, I mean, that's a lot of, and the apartments upstairs, I mean, just if 2 people live in a 1-bedroom, you said 1.2 cars. Is that what you said?
I said it can be handled through leases. For example, the 1-bedroom could be restricted to 1.5 or 2 cars.
Yeah, to me, that's
Right.
2 parking lots, right? I mean,
2
two
spaces.
two spaces.
Correct, yeah.
So if you count that as 2, and then you have the 4-bedroom, that's like 12 cars just for the residents.
We
And-
figured
and-
16.
16, and then what about the employees that are in those businesses? The number of employees, I mean, it could be 2, 3 for the retail. There's not much customer parking for all those businesses. I mean, if I'm counting right. I just have a little concern about the number of spaces for customers versus employee parking,
What's the
tenant
number
parking.
again? What do you have, 68 parking spots?
We have 68 on-site parking, and then there's 3 off-site parking. 8 is required. We're asking for a 15% reduction, which, by the way, is consistent with the comprehensive plan and with the Hamlet zone. There's a lot of discussion about uses, and all of the consultants' comments. We really wish we had a crystal ball, but we don't. But I can tell you what your 2011 comprehensive plan says about redeveloping the hamlets. And your planner, in his first review, even said that this is a fine example of
Is your
implementing.
microphone on?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. This is a fine example of implementing the comprehensive plan. You know, we don't know who the end users are going to be, but likelihood is we don't anticipate it being retail, likely be office for the most part, but again, we don't know that.
Yeah, again, my comment was if it is retail and there are employees, it doesn't look like there's that much space for customers if it is retail versus office.
Okay. Anything else, Rich?
No, I'm good.
Sandy?
But that can always change, right? I mean, you could have a tenant in there for a year that doesn't make it, and then, so that seems to be
Just like any other
something
building
that
in
can move, yeah.
the village.
Rick, I had a question as far as Rick and John, on the traffic study where they didn't take into account for traffic generated by any proposed or approved developments. What about the applicant that's in litigation on Estrada? Shouldn't that be taken into consideration?
Well, I think what John had said is that he was satisfied with what was taken into consideration, but deferred to this board of whether or not you believed that other projects were necessary to take into consideration. And that would include all projects that are approved or before you for approval. And it's up to the board to determine in the seeker analysis, because you haven't made a determination of significance yet, as to what you think is appropriate. And so, yes, as to Estrada, that would be, well, actually,
It doesn't
I
mean anything that
say,
you just said.
I take
That's
that
why I'm
back.
asking.
I take that back. With respect to the hotel, that is not an approved use at this point in time, so that you would not take that into consideration.
Okay.
But there are others that are before you for approval that are fair game to be taken into account, and there's obviously things that have been approved, either existing or approved but not yet existing, that can be taken into account, so that you can go ahead and determine what they should take into account in connection with the traffic analysis. Obviously, you normally defer to your traffic consultant as to what is appropriate, but he has deferred to you to some degree as to what else you might want to take into account. But the hotel is not something that's approved, and therefore you wouldn't take that into account. So I stand corrected on what I first said.
Normally what happens is, we take into account what projects that are approved, not, for example, that are in front of the board now, et cetera. So, for example, the gardens at Harriman would not be included in that. In other words, I would never have this applicant of this size project to include that major project in its analysis, because there are going to be improvements that are going to be necessary for that project that they have no way of knowing what's going to be implemented. In fact, that project isn't approved. But if the board knows of any specific project that is not covered by the 2% growth rate, that we have them apply a 2% growth rate for several years to take care of the smaller type projects, instead of looking at them individually, I'd rather just put a blanket 2%. And then start looking at, are there any specific projects immediately adjacent to it, et cetera, that may affect it? We did not know any that met that category, but if we missed something, I just wanted to give the board the opportunity to do that, because it was a very tight time frame. We had to get the analysis done. But as far as the size of this project and the levels of service that came out of it, resulting level of service, I'm more concerned about the operation of the site than I am as specific about whether or not they included every last car. I have questions about driveway to 32, how it's going to be, whether the DOT is even going to allow it. And I think that has a greater importance to this application than.
And what about the in-school versus not in-school? Do you think-
No, I definitely think we should do a recount.
Okay,
But I think the count, if the applicant, because of cost or whatever reason, doesn't want to do all, they did the AM, the PM, and the Saturday hour. If they don't, if for some reason they ask the board to be a little lenient, I say if we at least did a sensitivity analysis, taking the worst hour, which is the evening rush hour, and did that as the basis of a sensitivity analysis, that would give the board the comfort as to what the rest are happening.
okay.
But definitely it should be counted, because the oldest count we have that includes those hours is a 2012 count, which is, in our opinion, too old.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have right now.
Thank you. Robert?
John, I think you mentioned that there could be a backup of traffic or a problem between the two lights, the one on Smith Clove and Estrada, where traffic could be somehow not moving, and that would have to be included in the study. Is that right?
Well, what we're saying is not included in the study, and, but but the DOT, in looking at this application, that's why I said a problem with the 32 driveway, may, if they do allow a driveway, may in fact restrict left turns coming out of the driveway to 32.
To go southbound.
And that would be at certain times of the day,
They
right?
may just say anytime during the day.
Okay.
Because you could always go out the town road and then back up to the same location.
That's all.
That's all?
Yes.
Okay. In regards to the traffic study, I think we need to ask you to do recount.
Well, I would just ask the board that we, as John recommended, that we do the single, was it the PM?
I would be comfortable if we did a PM analysis, because then I would at least get the worst time period, and we know what what the conditions are.
And the reason I request that is we had the BHB report, which we didn't really get until July. We went out and did the test, or, the study immediately to keep this project moving, and,
Right.
we're willing to go ahead and do the
Yeah,
additional.
I only
PM.
have a one-page response. I couldn't find a report from VHB, so,
It's a one-pager.
yeah, the one-page
Yeah.
report, yes. The only reason why I say school is because anytime between 8, when did I leave the other morning? I left about, I got caught in traffic at 8:10 Thursday morning. Yeah, you're 7:30. I got stuck at 8:10. As most of us know, when you stop at this, when you're going southbound and you're on 32, and you get stopped at the light for Smith Clove traffic all empties up onto 32 going southbound. By the time they get out onto the road, about half the times, they block the intersection because the Estrada light is red. And it is an impact, so we gotta kind of figure out something, because the light at Estrada, they hold the traffic on 32 more so than they hold it on the two side roads, Estrada and Edgewood? Edgewood. So there is a little potential of a problem there, whether it's a school day or any time, because people have to get to work. And I was delayed there the other day. So it's just important that we figure that traffic intersection out, because,
Well, that brings up a separate question. That brings up the question of the current operational condition of those two lights, how they run it, and how the DOT has it coordinated. So either the village can look at it, or we can have the applicant look at the coordination of those two signals and any suggested changes. With respect to the impact of this particular application on that operation, I think the queuing on 32 would tend to restrict the driveway movements from the new proposed driveway out into 32. But if I'm looking at this site in the morning hour, the retail is probably very low, unless, shouldn't say this, but we have a Dunkin' Donut, but the last thing I want to see is a drive-through. Unless you have a fast food type operation that generates a lot of traffic, and I don't see it on this particular site. I see this site basically the residential coming in and then some of office employees, because I think the retail establishment, if it's there, are going to be at the later hour. So it's not going to be out at that 8:15. But I definitely think that it should, and if you want, I can inquire the state for them to look at the timing of those two lights to see if in fact they can optimize the conditions.
that might be,
I'll make the call tomorrow to the state for that and leave it, I won't burden the applicant with that, we'll make the
you're
call.
okay with that?
I'm fine with that.
He loves that,
It's
I
your
mean, I
dime, so-
volunteer.
It's your dime, but
Right.
okay.
He's gonna
If
pay
you-
it one way or the other,
If
so,
you can check out on the signalization, 'cause I know it's been changed.
that's fine,
I-
we will
it's
check it.
not- It's not the same in a long time, but if you can do that, and then I'd be okay, I'm understanding what you're saying about the morning. So you just want the PM
Well, the-
analysis? You tell.
The PM is the most important, but I could understand there
'Cause you
could be a
live there.
problem sometimes with the morning,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, what we can do, we can count the afternoon hour, and then there's going to show an increase of traffic, a percentage increase in traffic over the count they did during the summer. We can apply that same percent increase to
Okay.
the morning hour and a Saturday,
All right.
and then let them run the analysis based upon that. So we'll just compute the percentage and increase what you counted in August
You're okay with that?
by that
Okay.
percentage, and then
Yeah.
run the
Sandy?
analysis.
Rich, you're okay with that analysis?
Yep.
You're okay with that?
Yes.
Okay, done. Anything else I'm missing? Anyone else? Sandy, did you have comments on this? I forgot, who ended I started with?
I finished.
You finished, you're
Yes.
good, okay. Anything else, Rich?
I'm good.
All right, so you need to go back and figure out what you're going to do. We're gonna have to talk to Gary about the screening, the landscaping. Secra needs to be done. We did intent, declared lead agency, unlisted action, so we're going into, what do I have to do next for seeker? Just bear with me, I'm
It-
fading here, sorry.
A determination of significance is next in line,
Okay.
but I don't think you're ready
We're
for
ready
that
for that
until
yet.
after the traffic
All right.
analysis at the least.
All right, so I'll wait on that, currently 10. Am I missing anything? Help me out here. Nope, so I guess the ESO meeting, we're just going to try and set it up for the 14th, hopefully around 3 o'clock. Yes, Steve?
I have a question, though, just
Yes.
in terms of seeker and trying to get to a closure there.
Right.
In Dennis's memo, he said, regarding the seeker, he said certainly some detailed analysis review is required, so you may make a determination on environmental significance. Is there anything, other than, we've asked this question before, we've got, the traffic study surfaced. Is there anything else that you would expect from this applicant that we can at least address now so we can get to the finish line on seeker? Are we pretty good?
Rick?
That's still part,
I lost my
as far as areas for your review under seeker, and you can hear from the other consultants as well, but I see the only one that you really need at this point in time before making your determination of significance is the traffic-related aspects, not only the traffic counts, but also, as John mentioned, importantly, whether or not the DOT is going to allow the curb cut on Route 32, because if that's not done, then you have to analyze how this project goes and its impacts. So I think if you have those traffic issues wrapped up, in my mind anyway, that would be enough information for you to go ahead and make a determination of significance.
All right, so what do you want to do? I'm sorry, I'm not feeling well right about now. What do you want to, what's the board's pleasure?
As far, well, we need to wait for the traffic.
We need to wait for the traffic, yeah. Agreed?
I think what Steve's question was he understood that you need the traffic issues before you
So
can
we
make a
can't-
determination of significance, and his query was, is there anything else? I don't see
think-
anything else other
I
than
don't think there's anything else.
traffic.
No.
Anything else?
No.
Rich? No,
Okay, great, thank you.
I'm getting, my face getting red, I'm getting flush, I'm not. I'll be all right. I'm just getting tired, that's what it is. All right. Steve, we'll talk to you.
Yes.
Thank you. And you'll get back to us about the 14th, right? He's gonna, oh, I get these, I just go, whew. My face white now? We have one more thing to do. We can't go anywhere because I have one more item on the agenda. Sorry about that, yes, you can come back. So if I pass out on the floor, you can pick it up.
I'll always pick you up.
I know you will. All right. Sorry about that, but I'm just like, see how my face changes?
You going through the changes, what'd you say?
No.
Oh,
Smack from somebody?
that you just said that. Did you not just say, it's on tape?
Mr. Litko, would you like to come to the podium, please? No. I get shooting pain from my leg, and I just go, my leg, it's crazy. This next item is Melody Lane Properties LLC regarding a proposed freestanding sign. Applicant requested on the 26th to be briefly discuss this proposed amendment. The one thing I did notice on the applicant that we received on the 26th, bottom part wasn't signed. Could you make sure we get a revised? The property owner didn't sign the
It's the
bottom.
applicant and the owner.
All right, so
We'll have
that's not
them
gonna
sign.
hold us up, but if you can take care of that for me.
Will do.
I know you will. All right. Go ahead, briefly tell me what's going on down here.
We'd like to put up a sign for the Mercedes dealership at the south side of the entrance. We had originally contemplated the possibility of a sign closer to Larkin Drive with the cooperation of the village. Unfortunately, that would be within the Orange and Rockland transmission line easement, and Orange and Rockland is not, at the moment, enthusiastic about having a freestanding sign located in that easement. So for now, we just need to put the sign by the entrance. I spoke to Mr. Lockman today about relocating the landscaping that is proposed on the site plan now. We'll give you a sketch with that in the next couple of days. We're just looking to get the process rolling. I assume this would require a public hearing since it is a site plan amendment. And that's what we're here for tonight.
What is the height of this, since I can barely read the numbers?
I believe it's 13 feet. I'll confirm that tomorrow to be sure.
It's, that says 13 feet, 1.5 inches.
Sorry, I forgot the 1.5.
Okay. And that's above ground, or that's from the base, from the ground? Because I see it's on the,
Yes.
That's from the grade up to the tippy
from the
top.
grade, okay.
There is a provision in the code which allows the building inspector to require a separation, but
Yep,
I believe Gary is not going to require that in this case.
okay. All right, Dennis, do you have anything to comment on this before we move on to?
Yes, just a couple of things. One is sight distance, although there's not a lot of traffic, there is some traffic going by there. This is a sign that goes, it's a full engaged sign all the way almost to the ground. So it blocks the sight distance there. I think if they can move it back just a couple of feet away from the roadway, it'll still have same visibility on the road, but a car stopped at the stop sign will be able to see to the left. So I think they might want to just show the sight lines there. There's a pond that's located right there. It's pretty tight between it and the pond, but it looks like there's adequate space there, and I don't think that's the access location. I just note that for you. And the last thing is the illumination. There's nothing on the plan about illumination. Is it internally illuminated? Do you know?
I believe it is.
Okay.
I will also confirm that.
Okay, internal illumination is, I think, what the board would want. I don't think you want a spotlight on it. So internal illumination, if there's any hours or something like that. Okay, that's all I have.
Dennis, you're saying sight distance for when they're leaving the property?
Yeah, if you're leaving the property and you look to your left, the sign is there. The
Right.
cars coming from the left side, which are allowed to come this way. There's a gate the other way, but they're allowed to come this way. If they come through there, you might not be able to see them there.
Is this solid line that's there, isn't that not the stop sign? The
Yeah,
stop line?
that's the stop line.
So,
If that's the nose of the car, and you see where the person is behind there, you want to see not just right in front of the sign, you want to see a long way back. So it looks like it might have some impact on the visibility. They didn't do anything on that, but if you think about where a nose of a car being at that stop line, the person's eye on the left would block the lane coming from the south.
I think the sign location is staked out, so we'll try to get somebody to take a photo of it, show you what
thank you,
is
because,
visible.
because if I'm stopped here,
If you're stopped here, a car is like this.
The Yeah.
driver's sitting here. If you look at that, that's all
he sees. most of us will be pulling up a little closer than that, I think. Especially if I'm driving a Mercedes, especially if I'm driving, yeah, so as long as if I'm driving Mercedes, I'm not gonna, okay. Not that I have one. Okay. All right, so Jonathan. I wanna-
We checked it against the sign standards, the 13-foot, 1-inch height's okay. It's set, as long as it's set over, the 15-foot from the pavement is good, it only needed to be 12. It's 50 square feet, they can go up to 200. So all of that works. The only thing we noticed is that on the landscaping plan, they intended to install some plantings right about where the sign is. So they probably will want clearance around the sign of the plantings in case somebody is trying to see the sign from the south side coming up Melody Lane towards Larkin. So the landscape, and I discussed this with Mr. Lithgow, and he said they would adjust the landscaping plan to account for the new existence of the sign. And you do need to have an amended site plan because the site plan didn't have the sign located on it. At the time you approved the site plan, they didn't know where they were putting the sign for sure, so it wasn't there on the
Yep.
plan. So it's not a field change, it is an amendment to the site
So
plan.
that requires a public hearing?
Yes.
Okay.
Rick, thoughts, concerns, issues?
Yes, I agree, the public hearing is required. I also believe that a GML 239 is now required, so that should be re-referred as soon as we get the revised plans. And with respect to seeker, I think, did you mention seeker or no?
No, I didn't.
Okay, I'm sorry. That you can, I think it'd be appropriate for this board to make a motion to reaffirm the negative declaration that you had generally for this project. This sign, in my estimation, would not legally rise to the level of requiring any additional seeker review. And that's it.
If you want to go home, you can.
Say it again?
You can go home.
Okay, I was just going to weigh in on the site distance.
Okay, go
The
ahead.
site distance is just basically a standard line of sight. It's based upon the speed limit, and it's measured, not necessarily always from the stop bar. It's usually measured from what they call the travel way, and it's usually 14 feet back where the person would be sitting to looking. And it's just a matter of making sure that you have a clear line of sight. And if you have to move the sign 2 feet or whatever it's required, it's easy enough to do. Better to do it now than later.
Okay. Rick, explain to me why we have to go to GML again.
Simply because of the way that this is an amended site plan, and so GML says that if it's a site plan within a certain distance, it's triggered and needs to get referral. It has no provisions in the GML with respect to that this is a certain type of site plan amendment and therefore can be waived, in my opinion.
Okay. What's our meeting, if this goes out tomorrow to GML?
Our meeting in December is the 6th. So that's the first Wednesday. So if you
That's
get it out
national,
by next
that's my
Wednesday-
national birthday, so we're not having a meeting, only kidding.
Actually, if you get it out by Monday, I think you'll have the 30 days.
And,
Will we?
George, would you be able to get the revised plans in so that they can get the referral out by Monday?
We have, so we can get them in on Friday.
Okay.
'Cause if we're going to December 6th for a public hearing, we should have responses back for GML.
That's not a requirement, right? So,
Okay.
I mean, you are allowed to hold your public hearing regardless of whether or not you've gotten that GML requirement. And the GML requirement are going to be just like other agencies. Other agencies can contact you at any time and tell you their input. So you don't have to hold open a public hearing to make sure that the public gets those comments before it comments, because you're going to receive those comments. I mean, you can do it that way, but I see no reason under these circumstances, especially when we're dealing with simply the location of a sign, that you need to hold up a public hearing until you get the GML 239 report, which will likely be the same report that they gave last time,
Okay.
other than potentially the site distance issue.
Robert, any thoughts, concerns?
No, I'm fine with that.
Sandy?
I just want to make sure, so this is going to be the permanent sign. If somehow O&R later down the road says, oh, yeah, you could do it.
It may be that we would seek approval from the village in that case to move the sign.
Okay, so it's not going to
Because-
be two signs, it's just going to,
No,
it would just
it
be moved.
definitely, it's going to be the same sign in one place or the other.
Okay, that's all.
Quick question.
Chris?
Do you, does the applicant have to come in front of the board again in the event that they want to maximize the size that they're entitled to, up to 200 square feet, every time they make a change? Or is it just the location?
They're supposed to come in to you with the sign that they're proposing.
Right, and if they change that,
Modify that significantly, they gotta come back.
Okay.
yeah, it's an amendment to the site plan, and all amendments to site plans require a public hearing.
Okay. But according to your calculations, whoever threw that number out, they're entitled to up to 200 square feet. And you're using, and you're only utilizing 50.
Correct.
You sure? That's what you want?
Standard sign.
Yeah,
That's
but,
that's the
The
sign
only-
that Mercedes
yeah.
has, yeah.
okay.
It's a franchise requirement.
All right.
I know Mr. Agresta is comfortable with that particular sign.
Okay. Dennis also raised the issue quite properly that since we're within 500 feet of a municipal boundary, that with respect to the public hearing, there will also be required a GML 239-N notice to the clerk of the Village of Harriman. So simply that the public hearing is going to happen, that's all. And Maria knows how to give out those standard notices, but just for the record, it will also
The
require
secretary,
that.
Maria, not me.
Maria Rubio, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Rich, thoughts, concerns, questions?
No, good.
Okay. With all that being said, I would like to offer a motion to schedule a public hearing for December 6th and authorizing the attorney to prepare a amended resolution of approval. Can I do that before the neg deck, or do I have to do the neg deck first?